All right. Well, we've got a lot to do tonight, so if you don't mind, I think we should probably get going. Um, I've got the approval to record out of the way. I'm really glad we've got more people than we had last time and hope that's a good trend moving forward. We'd like to turn it over to Dale for reading and acceptance of the minutes of the March 16th meeting. Dale, did you write anything down from the last meeting?
Probably not. But we had a good meeting. The officers all introduced themselves, and we got the meeting together. Doug brought us up to date on the steps he'd taken to get the finances back together. And we sort of reminisced about some old times. Figured out who was going to do what. Roger agreed to work on advanced programs, figure out what we can do in this hopefully going away pandemic thing at some point. And I think that's about it. We had a good meeting, and that was it.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody object to the reading of the minutes? Otherwise, we'll accept them as read. Consider them accepted. Doug Garlinger, you're the hero of tonight. I'd like to have you talk about what's been going on in the treasurer's world.
Well, I am glad I have you guys full. So we were elected on March 3rd, as I recall. And the very next day, I filed with the State Attorney General, Todd Rokita, to try to get our $7,000 back. And then a few days ago, I called them just to see what was going on, and they assured me that they would get to us, but it could be 90 days because they were so far back, but it'd at least be 60 days. And then I got home yesterday around 3 o'clock, 2:30, and there was a check. So it's 39 days. So in 39 days, we got a $7,120.24 check, which included around $67 in interest. And so I deposited it by 3:45.
Just to make sure it was good.
Well, let go of things fast. And then I had to call you while I was depositing it because you don't live very far away.
Yeah.
PNC Bank. And it kept going straight to voicemail. Not that you could have run right over there anyway, although I guess you could have conceivably. But so you just need to get there yourself and get so that you can sign. I don't know how many signatories we want, but at this point, I can sign a check. I don't need a second signer. Chuck will be able to sign a check, and he doesn't need a second signer either. Of course, he didn't have any checks. I have all the checks. Two things that I would note about money. I'm owed $25. That was my total expenses in getting this done over the 39 days, which that cost was to be registered with Hamilton County to have the name Society Broadcast Engineers. I didn't dwell on the Chapter 25 part too much because I didn't want to complicate it with the check having to be made out to Chapter 25 because that's not what the original bank account was. The original bank account was just Society of Broadcast Engineers. So, you know, one of my adages is, and Tom's heard this, if you can't stand the answer to the question, don't ask it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Steve Waltz
Good point.
many times.
Yep.
And probably Mark too. So
So aside from the $25 that the society owes you, Doug, are you aware of other people that are owed money?
Only Tom Weber, as far as I know. I don't know how much, but several years ago, when I worked at Wish and he worked at Wish and we worked together, he tried to do this as well. Probably has $250. I don't know who has the receipts unless.
I believe that John Koser has the receipts, or at least I gave them to him, and it's somewhere between $200, $250, something like that. it's mainly when we were having some meetings like at MCL or something like that, and we were, and I just ponied up the cost and figured that, well, I'd get reimbursed at some point, and then that some point got sort of disappeared.
That was MCL and Speedway, right?
That was one of them, but yeah.
So, yeah, you paid for the meals.
And then there was something else in it, because I think we got one of them paid for by somebody else at one point. But anyway,
Larry Oaks paid for one of them entirely out of the Meredith budget.
that's true. Yes. Yeah. But it's anyway, I will contact John Koser and see if he still happens to have those receipts, and we'll take it from there.
Great.
So,
Those are the only two. And so, I don't want to write a check to myself, Chuck. So
I will get over to PCL Bank and get that done and then write you a check, Doug.
I can write a check to Tom, but I think we need to, we need the receipts first, but
Yeah.
I think we need to approve by a vote here, I think, that I can get my $25 and Tom can get up to 275, whatever his receipts add up to.
Well, let's just see his receipts. When he brings them the receipts, then we'll just approve that as it is. Is that okay?
and one question, do we owe Tom interest as well?
No.
I want to be the very first person to go on record as saying congratulations to Doug for his efforts. I think it's absolutely phenomenal, and we all owe him a debt of gratitude.
Definitely, I'll second that.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, when I was looking into this, it was very complicated. We had to have a board of election or a board of directors. We had to have bylaws. We had to show them to the bank. Or the state. It got complicated, but you've cut through a lot of this stuff.
Let's just say that, well, Steve.
Yeah.
You've known me since 1972, you say. I say 4. But he knows that I have a way of managing to get things done.
That's wonderful. Now the question becomes, and
as far as the bylaws, I steered clear of the bylaws and I didn't show them to the bank, and I was able to manage that because the bylaws never anticipated Zoom. The bylaws never anticipated another things. Bylaws says, I think, that you have to have one meeting north of town and one meeting south of town over the course of the year. We can't abide by them. So
Never anticipated COVID either.
no.
So,
No, I don't think anybody anticipated that.
yeah.
So, all right.
So now what do we do, guys? I mean, Doug, what do you see as the possible uses of this for Chapter 25?
Just for the common good, whatever that turns out to be.
Mm-hmm. I've heard a number of concepts brought forward.
Maybe we go over, when we can drive around, maybe we drive over to Belden in Richmond or something. I don't know.
Oh, that might be interesting.
Yep, I agree. But
Yes.
We could also do something for the Ennis Society. We could also, fund something at Ennis.
You realize I cannot suggest that.
Well, I just did.
Okay, but we haven't even talked about this.
Nope.
But I can't suggest that and then turn around and receive whatever, a few $100s.
Right.
But one of the things that Megan needs and the Ennis trustees are looking at is coughing up maybe 20 grand or more for some new software for her. Her software is very old with respect to the questions and the database and some stuff. So that's something we've talked about. There's only 3 Ennis trustees and I'm one of them. And I was appointed by Chuck about what, 93, 94, 95, somewhere.
Yeah, back when my hair was a different color. Yeah.
And
Well,
I think we're all
we-
suffering from that.
We can't fix that problem of the software, and we can't fix 20K, but we can help.
Yeah. And, and Jim Ragsdale, the new John Poray, he was helpful in this process.
Mhm.
I gave him the words to write in a letter to the Attorney General, and he turned it around like in 24 hours and pretty much wrote just what I said on stationery, endorsing us getting the 7,000.
So what I'd like to suggest is that we don't make a decision about the disposition of the funds here and now. What I'd like to suggest is we talk about it this meeting and maybe the next one, and then have a formal poll and maybe do it online or something so that people who can't make every meeting can still be a part of things and vote on it. It's a relatively sizable decision, and I'd like to have everybody feel a part of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Makes sense to me.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
we have the money. It doesn't need to burn a hole in our pocket. So we
No.
can go forward. And when we come out of this pandemic, of course, I don't much care anyway. I go places, and I just drove 3,000 miles to Florida and back.
Mhm. Mhm. How many of us have had both of our vaccinations?
I have.
I have.
Excellent.
I had more Moderna.
Hmm.
My daughter got the Johnson & Johnson. So I'm going to check with her after 13 days and see if she's still alive on Friday.
Yeah. My son was all signed up for Johnson & Johnson, and I told him, I said, why don't you try someplace else? And
Go Moderna, I picked one that was approved by the EU. That's all I cared about.
Yep.
Because I need to travel.
Sure.
And as you know, and Steve Walton probably knows, I haven't gone to another country in the entire year 2020. I
Isn't
can't.
that crazy?
This is amazing.
So if everything goes according to my plan, by the end of this month, I will be going to Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao.
Excellent.
And technically that's 3 countries. So that'll take me to 101 countries,
Mhm. Wonderful.
most of them legally.
Most, yes.
Most.
Yeah.
All right.
Don't ask,
So
don't tell.
the next thing I have up on my my schedule for today is, if I can figure out how to share. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Why I can't share. Oh, there it is, right there. The big green one in the middle. I want to share the where is it? Chapter Chairs newsletter, just to give you an idea of what's going on with National and what they want us to talk about it. Can everybody see this okay?
Yep.
Okay. And I don't want to read the whole darn thing, but I figure people may want to know what's going on. And rather than read the whole thing, since we're on Zoom anyway, I thought I'd just share it with you. This is what they've sent out for the month of April for us all to talk about during our chapter meeting. And there's the SBE Leadership Development course. We were talking about that this afternoon. I've been to that, but it was when it was the NAB management course back in the day. Then we've got a couple of webinars coming up.
Do you still have to go to Atlanta for that now?
I think it's in Atlanta. Yeah.
Okay. So Mark, you should have Tim Bowling send Doug Fish. You'll remember about 7, 8 years ago, I sent Bob Selecki down there.
Yes, I remember that.
They're in their membership drive right now. So if you know somebody who should be an SBE member, sign up. And there's some pretty cool things in terms of awards that you can win when you're the person that recommended that the person who signed up says. So worth doing. I've won that award in the past, and that's nice. SBE compensation survey is there. There's an SBE Web Extra in just a few days on April 19th, which is focusing on ideas for those who've been laid off or working for work. If you aren't renewed for your membership, now's the time. You're a couple weeks late. And one of the things we probably ought to talk about is whether or not we need a certification chair here at SBE Chapter 25, whether we want to take that on and start having our own exams here in the local chapter, or whether we can just somehow go across the fact that we've got National right here in town. What do people think about that?
Well, I've done several.
Mhm.
The Channel 8, I would have a few applicants come in to Channel 8. Or in the case of John Koser, I gently persuaded him over time to get his certification, and he took the test in my office. And he was very glad he did it after the fact. And then also a fellow named Nate Russell that some of you know here. Interesting fellow, huh? But he took his CBNE, and that's got to be one of the hardest tests that there is. And he did very, very well on the CBNE. And now he then went down to Black News Channel. He was with IMS and Channel 6, 59 at one point, went down to Black News Channel, and then now he's with a company called Alpha Video, where he goes all around the country as an integrator.
That's great. So maybe we just leave this on the table as a thought, whether somebody'd like to pick that up, and we could start up our own certification program right within Chapter 25 if somebody'd like to be certification chairman. So I'll just leave that there. And there's a comment here about the awards program, but I believe that the cutoff on that was the last day of March, rather. So I think that it's too early for us to be nominating for somebody for a chapter or individual awards. So with that, my next item on my agenda is Roger Bishop to talk about the upcoming meetings. Roger?
Well, since we're getting back into it, we don't have any takers yet, and that'll be for the June and following meetings, but the feelers are out. We've reached out to a lot of the vendors that we deal with on a regular basis, and it's pretty easy lift for them right now to do just a Zoom meeting like we conduct business every day. But hopefully by June and maybe not too long thereafter, we've got some in-person opportunities. So it's moving along.
I should mention that an old friend of Chapter 25, Fred Baumgartner, I spoke with him yesterday, and he's planning to present next month in the May meeting on ATSC, AES, or EAS topics, future television stuff. And since there had been some interest expressed within our survey on ATSC3, and Fred is like one of the most well-versed people on the planet on the subject, I thought it'd be useful to bring him in. So I talked to him. Actually, I spoke with him on Sunday because we were both checking into Chapter 73, the Ham chapter, and so he agreed to put it on his calendar and plans to be with us next month. So that's what's going on. Anybody else have feedback or ideas for Roger as in terms of presentations they'd like to see or subjects they'd like to see covered that we could work on?
Chuck, one of the things that you had mentioned in the previous meeting was a trip to Belden. And I was thinking about that, and I just kind of throw this out that I know we don't really have these meetings in the evenings, but what would actually be best if there's some way that we could actually meet during the day when the manufacturing equipment's running in the engineering center. That way we could actually see it being made. If you come in the evening, everything's usually shut down. So just throw that out to everybody, just kind of, feedback on what your thoughts on are doing a daytime meeting, whenever that becomes available.
One of the problems with about half the people here today is we can get away and then drive over there. Now, Mark Plesner probably can't. Some of the others that actually working at the station every day. EJ can't get away, right? But Steve can get away, unless everybody's worried about COVID. But so I don't know.
Well, we're never going to get everybody at any meeting. And I think having some flexibility and being able to do different, I suspect there's people who aren't here in the evening that could make it during the daytime.
So it's probably what is it, exit 149A or
Oh, that's for the RVs.
Well, yeah, but no, I know. We're back.
Everybody knows that.
Yeah, Tom Riker, exit 149.
Yeah, that's, or you can go to the next exit and take 27. Yeah, everybody's heard
27,
that.
US 27.
Yeah, he used to advertise far and wide. I mean, I had people from others. Yeah, Route 27. You just get off I-70 at Route 27, which is the just a little further east. Then you just take 27 all the way through town, clear the south edge of town. That's where the Belden Engineering Center is.
Oh, okay.
But the big factor, of course, is the COVID. I don't know when we could do that meet, but it's easy to get there. But yeah, it is a little bit of a drive. But we'll just keep that in mind for future when everything's been up and we could actually have some visitors.
Well, US 27 is very special to me. I grew up on US 27, about 40 miles, 35 miles north of Richmond. And then after I was no longer at Channel 8, about 3 or 4 weeks later, I drove US 27 all the way to Florida. On the interstate, 14 hours on the interstate. On the US 27, it took 31 hours.
I didn't know 27 went all the way to Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you live north of Richmond on 27?
I lived in Winchester, graduated high school there. I lived in Bryant, which is about 7 miles north of Portland. All of that's about halfway between Richmond and Fort Wayne.
Yep, Winchester, been there many times. Yep.
Mm-hmm. The world's fastest half-mile dirt track.
I have been there too.
AJ Foyt used to race there in the 60s and when I lived there.
And a lot of the NASCAR people that became famous
Yeah.
went through there, like Jeff Gordon, Tony Stewart. They've got pictures on the wall back when they were just getting going before they were famous.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot have been there.
Fastest half-mile dirt track in the country. And I have a very bad joke from Winchester that not only probably none of you would get, but I also can't tell it anyway.
Oh, bummer. I was all excited.
Oh, okay.
But you would have to know who owned the Speedway in the 60s. So.
All right. I suppose now would be a good time to bring up the question of old business. Is there any old business that should be discussed? I'm guessing no. Okay. And how about new business that people would like to bring up? Same thing. All right. With both of those disposed upon, would anybody like to declare the business meeting part of this meeting as closed?
I have one quick question.
Yeah.
I have a quick question, Doug. What was the amount again that we got the check for?
$7,120.24. That's a good chunk of money. I don't
Yeah.
know.
All right, good.
That's awesome.
Nice check.
Yeah, I probably won't focus.
No, we can kind of see it.
You
there.
got it.
There you are.
You got it.
I bought a new camera for this, so the Logitech C920E.
There you go.
Very
Excellent.
good. All right, good deal. Thanks for
And-
working getting that done.
Any other questions before we proceed to the program portion of the meeting? None. All right. Well, then, given that, I am going to share my screen once again and go to a presentation that I had done back about a couple of months ago for Barry Mishkin and his lunchtime group. And let's see, it's not sharing.
Hmm,
Let me figure out why not.
okay. Uh-oh.
Stop
Okay,
share.
there.
Oh, you got it? Yeah, okay, let me do it one more time.
Technology and radio.
One more time. Here we go. Share and then F5 to make it full screen.
Mhm.
Is it being seen in full screen?
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hot diggity dog, technology works. So the whole premise of this presentation is kind of take a look back on the test equipment that I figured most of us used back in the day. My first job in radio was in 1973. And I know a number of you are way beyond that, but that was my first job in radio. So I went back and tried to find out some of the old equipment that I used in those days. And then I'm going to contrast it with stuff that's available today. And I will say that my current employer makes a product that you may not know about that's kind of fun that I thought I would talk about at the end. And we'll actually have a live demo of it. So here's what we're going to talk about: revolutionary new technology in radio test equipment, where we came from, talk about lots of new and inexpensive devices you can find now, including non-contact voltage detectors, nano VNAs, multifunctional testers, multimeters, thermal imaging cameras, and then finally the FM direct sampling test set. We're going to go hands-on with it and then take your questions. So anybody recognize the old Grief Kit oscilloscopes? First
Well,
three radio stations I ever worked
absolutely.
for, I built my own test equipment in the station just because there wasn't anything I could believe in the station. How about this thing?
I have two
Uh,
of them.
Yeah, everybody's had at least one.
I bought mine
Uh,
at Dayton
yeah.
back in the day. How about this? Anybody recognize that?
Nixie
Yeah.
tube.
Nixie tube voltmeter. Back
Yeah.
many, many years ago, probably around 1970 or so, my father drove me up to Benton Harbor and we took a tour of Heathkit.
Wow.
And he bought me one kit, and this is what I chose, and I built it, and I had it, may still have it somewhere. I just haven't been able to discover where in the last couple of moves, but it's probably still around. Fascinating device, 2.5 digits. How about this? There's a story about this. This is a Singer spectrum analyzer with tracking generator and demodulator. And I bought this when I was a chief engineer in Durango, Colorado, at an AM/FM combination in Durango. And there was a television repair shop, and with a very eclectic owner that had gone out of business. And they were auctioning off all the stuff. And I'm walking around taking a look at it all, and I see this thing on the ground, and I kind of kicked it with my foot. And I said, "This television set work?" And they said, "Oh, I don't know." I said, "Can we turn it on and see?" And we turned it on. The little green line moved or the dot moved from the left to the right. And I said, "Oh, I bet I could fix it. I'll give you $25." They said, "Okay." And I had a spectrum analyzer. And I learned more with this spectrum analyzer just because it showed me graphically what I had been unable to understand in all of the mathematics. I learned about Bessel nulls, and I learned about all kinds of stuff that was great fun. And another story, while I was at that radio station, Gerald Ford became the owner of our stations. He bought the stations, and he showed up many times. And he was always with because it was after his presidency, he was always with the Secret Service, right? And back in those days, the Secret Service didn't have scrambling. Their radios were all using unique crystal sets that they would all pick out for a particular day. Well, little did they know, my spectrum analyzer could see exactly where it was, and it had a tracking demodulator, and I could put it on a big loudspeaker in the engineering office and let everybody hear it. The Secret Service was not too impressed, but I had fun.
So
Good job.
that was Gerald R. Ford, right?
Correct.
Does anybody know what the R stood for?
I think it didn't stand for anything.
No, Rudolph.
Really? No
Yeah.
clue. I will tell you, I had a very interesting conversation. We became friends. We would go out to dinner and things like that with he and Betty and my wife and I when he came to Durango. But I had a conversation with him one day, and I said, "Mr. President," I said, "I have a couple of problems that with you that I need to discuss." And he said, "What's that, Chuck?" And I said, "Well, first is you went to the University of Michigan and you played football for them, and I'm an Illini." And he said, "Oh, I think we can work past that, Chuck." And he said, "I know what the second one is." And I said, "What?" He said, "You voted for Carter, didn't you?" And I said, "Yes, Mr. President, I did." He says, "And I know why." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because I pardoned Nixon." And I said, "You're right." I said, I felt that Nixon deserved to be prosecuted. And he said, well, Chuck, and he looked me right in the eye. And he said, when I've been in this business my entire life. When I pardoned Richard Nixon, I knew it would cost me the presidency. I knew it would cost me my political career, but I did what I thought was best for the country as opposed to what I thought was best for me. And there have been many, many times, and I won't let this go in a political direction, but there have been many, many times since when I've wondered, how many times has a politician made that statement or had that thought since that time? I'd wager not very many. Anyway.
Hey, Chuck.
Yeah.
I see the spectrum analyzers from Singer. So where do you put the bobbin?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It was a very interesting. I actually did some research on them, and they were made in like Venezuela or something. They had some sort of strange organization that was doing stuff that was different than, but it was the sewing machine company. It was the same place. So anyway.
Throw in, I used to, in a different life between TV stations, I worked in Richmond, Indiana at a place called Fox Electronics on South 9th Street.
Mhm.
We did a lot of GE radio installations for farmers, for schools, for truck companies, dispatch, and I knew a lot about GE radios. And to work on them, Singer made a thing that you could work on the GE radios with and analyze them, somewhat like this, but not exactly like this. But Singer was a big name in Motorola and GE radio working on them back in the 70s.
That's fascinating. Interesting.
Doug, I remember Fox Electronics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Fox Electronics.
Yep. Yeah, I remember it. Yeah, I remember it.
And I lived in Winchester and I worked there.
All right. Continuing on. Anybody remember this? Anybody ever built
Absolutely.
one?
Yeah. Built a couple of them.
Here's an interesting thing about this. So Hewlett Packard has a harmonic distortion analyzer with the auto null function that has the same general circuit inside. But Hewlett Packard licensed the technology from Heathkit. Heathkit was the one that developed it, and Hewlett Packard licensed the technology. So, fun stuff. How about this? That was what went along with it, right? Had a little light bulb inside, a little line bridge.
I
Yeah.
have one.
Do you still?
That one.
Yeah.
Yep. Good stuff.
You know, the wine bridge oscillator is what put Hewlett Packard in business
Mm.
many,
Really?
many years ago.
Hmm.
Yeah. They were doing research for Frederick Emmons Terman. They were students of his, and they were doing some research for a project that he had for the government, and they required stable audio. In those days, if you bought an audio generator, it was two RF things that would beat together to give you sort of an audio tone, but neither one was stable, and the audio wasn't either accurate or stable. So the two of them sat down and designed the Wine Bridge audio oscillator to do this project. And Terman looked at him and says, "You ought to patent that." The rest is history.
Yeah, I guess so. Successful.
Yeah.
How about that? Everybody remembers that? You know, it's funny
Yeah.
because that, to me, this is current technology, but it's not anymore, right? There's all sorts of stuff that has gone beyond that. Let's talk about new stuff that's available in the marketplace. Now, I use a website. I don't any of you use it. I use a website called Banggood, Banggood. It's a Chinese company, and you can buy all kinds of stuff there, and it's a lot of technical stuff, and it's really inexpensive. So this is a very cool product. This is a non-contact voltage detector that you can use that'll detect any voltages between about 24 volts and 1,000 volts in AC. And it can be useful for saving your life, right? So for that kind of price, why not? And this is a very, very cool product. If you haven't played with one of these, it's worth doing.
Yeah, those are nice.
This is a network analyzer. I remember when a network analyzer was a $15,000 box or more.
Yeah.
This thing.
And 50 pounds.
Well, exactly. Yeah. This thing, I have 2 of them, and they're wonderful. They work very, very well. You can see a Smith chart. You can see SWR. You can see, you can even do TDR, time domain reflectrometry, on one of these things. And it's all self-contained in this little tiny box with a color LCD. And amazing thing. If you haven't played with one of these, it's worth doing.
What's shortwave radio?
Yeah, it's what I spend my time playing around with most of the time for fun. Yeah. And if you haven't played with one of these are cool too. For $18.99, you can plug almost any device on the planet into it, close the little zero force connector, and it'll tell you what it is and what its measurements are. You can put a transistor in there. It'll measure the gain of the transistor, measure the specs. You could put a Zener in there. It'll tell you all about it. Capacitors, resistors, inductors, and it just does it. There's no problem. You can take your parts box, plug it into this thing one at a time, and know everything about all your parts. If your eyesight is like mine, and it's harder and harder to see the resistor color codes or read the numbers on the side of the inductors or capacitors, plug it in here and you can see it.
If it's good.
For $18.99. And this is a digital everything meter. Instead of a VOM these days, this is what you get. This is a digital multimeter with a clamp meter that does RMS current, both DC and AC. And you can see the ranges for all the damn things. It measures frequency too, up from 1 hertz to 10 megahertz, temperature from 0 to 1832 degrees Fahrenheit, all for $23.99. Right? Crazy stuff. At least in my opinion. This stuff I marvel at.
It's pretty neat, and it fools a lot of people. I was watching a TV show the other night, and of course the bad person had a good person strapped in a super duper explosive vest, and and the cop is there, and he's trying to figure out, and he's got a meter that looks exactly like this, and he's waving it around over this vest and all this electronics, and it's like, well, dumbass, at least clip the thing around a wire and see what you got.
Yeah. You're not going to
Because
tell much when you clip it to his earlobe, right?
Yeah, right. They figured that whoever's watching the show is not going to have any idea what this stuff is. And it just drove me nuts.
I'm always amazed too that the bomber has a clock that's accurate. I mean, it's never 2 minutes fast, it's always exactly right. So
oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Though it appears as though they are attempting to measure DC current with the clamp-on ammeter.
For a short amount of time, that would work, but
yeah,
after it stabilizes,
up to 600 amps, it says, and I don't think they're putting those through the banana plugs.
No, they've got them now that can actually measure DC current. At one point I read about the technology, and I don't remember what it was, but I know it did work. So for $24, big deal.
Well, this is the thing. If it maybe the construction quality of it is poor. Maybe it's not like the best products you've ever had, but if it fails, you throw it away and you buy another one.
Exactly.
Right. Anyway.
No, actually, you take it into your workbench and you fix it.
Yeah.
Even though it costs $24, you're still going to fix it, right?
It's all service.
Some of us old geezers might do that.
But you never send it in for calibration.
Oh gosh, no. Gosh, no. I will say that I expected this stuff to be pretty poor in terms of its calibration, but because it's totally digital inside, I have found in general these products have been pretty high accuracy, surprisingly so.
Yeah, I believe.
And then there's the thermal imaging camera. For 120 bucks, you can take this over to the breaker box at the transmitter site and find out which of the terminals is overheating, or inside the transmitter, which of the components is overheating without burning all of the finger stuff off the end of your finger, right? So these are tools that I never had. I never even dreamt of having, but can really change a lot about what you can do today.
Yeah. It's interesting. I heard of them when they first came out, but they're very expensive. I can't remember the name of the company, but it was really high zoot stuff.
Yep.
And a lot of it you actually had to, hook it up, and it was, you couldn't just carry it around like this.
This has got a rechargeable battery inside.
Yeah. I actually saw a guy do this. I currently work as a contract engineer down at the city county building. And the guy came in and he was using this on all the breaker panels on every floor. And he found the one in our area and he said, nope. He said that we're going to have to replace the insides of that breaker box.
Wow.
And that's what they did. They shut the thing down, took all the breakers out, took the guts out, put new in, put the breakers back on, put the load back on it, took the camera, looked at it again, says, yep, said, now we're in good shape, because they found a couple of the older conductors that were going bad because of the heat.
Well, of course, you've got to accept the fact that it's a Chinese thing, so its measurement accuracy is only plus or minus 2 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
Oh,
Anyway, I find these kinds of things fun, and even though I don't have the need to do the kind of work that justifies all of this equipment, I buy it just for the fun of it. I mean, just to marvel at the technology that's there. So now I'm going to talk about another piece of test equipment, again, relatively inexpensive, that my company happens to sell that you might find interesting. It's a state-of-the-art 16-bit SDR, software-defined receiver, with specialized broadcast FM analysis tools. It's designed for off-air monitoring and direct connection to the sample port. So think of this as a mod monitor, but with a lot more stuff in it. So you can hook it up to your sample port on your transmitter, or you could put it on an antenna, as I'm going to do here tonight. The frequency range is from 100 kilohertz to 140 megahertz, and it requires a relatively powerful Windows 10 machine. The only connectors on here are the RF connectors going in and the USB connector that hooks to the PC, and that USB connector also supplies the power. So that's that. So this is what the screen of the software is going to look like, and we're going to go in and take a look at it live. You can see an RF spectrum analysis here. You can see that's a waterfall. This is the spectrum analysis with maximum levels. There's the multiplex spectrum. So this is DC to 100 kilohertz and over 100 dB dynamic range from top to bottom. There's a modulation power, shows you how dense your modulation is. An audio spectrum analyzer showing you the left and the right, plus peaks, instantaneous deviation. Up here, probably very, very powerful, is the RDS decoding and analysis. It's telling you what's going on with the RDS. Deviation history over time, deviation histogram, stereo monitor, and the stereo quality. So that's basically 1/4 of a Lissajou working there on the lower right-hand corner. So this is showing you the kinds of things. This happens to be an HD station, so you can see the frequency is the horizontal axis, time is on the vertical, and you can see the 2 HD sidebands. The device does not decode HD radio, but you can tell that it's there. You can take a look at the left to the right, L plus R, L minus R, and the 19 kilohertz and the RDS levels. There's the RF spectrum analyzer. Again, you can see the HD sidebands. There we're looking at almost 100 dB top to bottom, over looks like a couple of megahertz, or no, 1.2 megahertz in width. And again, I make this mention. I mean, we don't need mod monitors anymore. There's no legal reason you have to have this, except that if you are caught with overmodulation from the FCC, they ask you to prove how you were able to prove that it wasn't overmodulating. And so that's where this can come into place. It also helps you do deviation analysis, and to a much greater extent than you could do with just a mod monitor or a pair of headphones. It will actually tell you the density of your modulation. So you can adjust your processor for maximum modulation. And there's baseband spectrum analysis. You can see the 0 to 100 kilohertz, see your 38 kilohertz double sideband L-R, 19 kilohertz pilot L+R, a 57 kilohertz spectrum or RDS. And then there's this modulation loudness analysis here that shows the average power over time, RMS audio power in modulation, and the time that the modulation is measured, and reference to the equating of the average power. So you can see the difference between a song that is very lightly processed to a piece of content that's very densely processed. I don't remember ever having a box that could do that for me before. There's an audio spectrum analyzer and a stereo dual trace scope. Then the list is used. So you can see stereo information. You can see mono information. If it's a straight line going this way, that means the left is dead. If it's going this way, the right is dead. If this line is going like this, you're out of phase. You can see a lot at a glance with a device like this, right? So let me see, and I hate doing things live, but I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And then I'm going to go bring up the software and see if I can make it play for y'all. And any questions while I'm playing with getting this thing going?
Any software hacks to take it out of the broadcast band?
Take it out of the broadcast band? No, you know, this is a commercially available SDR where a broadcast engineer wrote custom software for broadcasting. So it's specifically for that. And let me see here. Where is it showing up? I wonder if it's this.
And the price is only $23.99.
Well, there's a no decimal point. It's actually about 1,500.
Okay, 1,500.
Okay, so this is an LPFM about a mile from my house on 106.3 WEPB low power. And I use this one to demonstrate, not only because it's a mile from my house and there's less multipath that's going to mess it up, but also because it's not like massively overmodulated and I don't want to get anybody in trouble. But you can see all the stations that I can pick up on my little antenna here in my office. And you can see the RF spectrum analyzer here. You can see the modulation showing up in the spectrum analyzer, multiplex spectrum, modulation power, audio spectrum, stereo monitor, the deviation history, the deviation. You can see it decoding in real time, the RDS.
Actually, I'm just seeing black.
Yeah, it says
Me
dark
too.
green share.
All right, let me change to share something else. Thank you for pointing that out so I don't end up making a total fool out of myself. 1 second. Let me see where it is.
College professor that gave a 2-hour lecture.
Yeah,
And
God.
the student said, we didn't see anything.
I found it. I found it. How's that?
Ah,
Hey, there it is.
Bueller.
Now you can see it much better. So I guess, as I said, this is WEPB low power here in Noblesville. And you can see, as I said, up here in the upper left-hand corner is a waterfall. It's actually kind of an upside down waterfall since the most current time is at the bottom. There's a spectrum analyzer here. You can reset. These are maximum and minimum limits on the spectrum analyzer, and you can reset that at any time. Same thing for the multiplex spectrum here. If I click on something, I can see it full page. Like, there you go. So you can see in some detail, you can see that's the 19 kilohertz pilot. Here's his L plus R. Here's his L minus R around 38 kilohertz. And there's his 57 kilohertz RDS. And he doesn't have any SCAs or anything like that going on right now. And I think one of the coolest things about this is the RDS decoding and the real-time information that you get about your RDS. A lot of stations don't have that functionality.
Yeah. So you can hook up speakers or headphones.
It actually does, and
demodulate.
I could put it on. I just haven't got virtual audio cable configured up so that I could share it with all of you. But in fact, it does do that.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Nice unit.
It's nice and small. It's like 4 by 4 by 2. So that's inches. And so it could fit in your little case and take it from station to station. And it's completely flexible with regard to the frequency. So it's a very good diagnostic tool, especially for those people who are like contract engineers and want to run around and check their stations out, make sure they're working right.
So is it pretty sensitive? It will pick up stations like a regular FM receiver, or do you have to be pretty close?
Well, so WF, where I am in Noblesville, right? On the south end of Noblesville, only a couple of blocks north of Doug. This is WFBQ. Again, it's you're going to see it very, very overmodulated. WOLT 103.3, NTR. It's going to get all these. They're going to get
Those
progressive.
are cumulus stations.
Yeah. Well, what I did is I took FM Fool, plugged in my address. Anybody ever used FM Fool? Pretty cool. FM Fool. I think it's net or org or something. But anyway, you could plug in an address and it'll give you the signal strengths of all the adjacent stations in declining signal strength and tell you what frequencies they're on. So that's what I did. I just plugged them all in. So here's WFYI and WICR and SQM, WIBC, and WFMS. And those are the ones that I've got programmed in here, but I could program in more.
And that's a cumulus station, but you don't have any
Sorry?
that's a cumulus station too, WFMS.
Yeah. Obviously, the limiting factor for the stations that are further away from me is that the multipath screws up all the readings. It makes it almost unusable. So really, if you're trying to figure out how strong a station is, or I'm sorry, I should say, how the modulation is on a particular station, go to the site, hook up to the sample port on the transmitter, just like a modulation monitor. You could put a Bell-R amp on an old Bell-R monitor, but you're not going to get the kind of accurate readings you would if you have it hooked up to the sample port, simply because of the multipath that exists. Any questions? This is all I had planned for this evening. I just wanted to give you a quick, interesting little presentation. Any questions that I can answer?
You can't pick up 800 kilohertz from Bonaire, can you?
Not well, it does actually cover the AM band, but it doesn't have any software written for demodulating AM. But I have plenty of SDRs that do that.
The reason I mentioned that, guys, is when I go to Bonaire, I'm going to go to what used to be a shortwave station by Transworld Radio, but now it's AM only on 800 kilohertz with a 450 kilowatt transmitter. 450 kilowatt AM transmitter covers the Caribbean, Venezuela, Colombia, and Bonaire. And there's somebody here that sold that transmitter when they worked for a different company.
I did. All solid state, 440 kilowatts, but who's counting?
50.
Yeah.
But the largest AM transmitter in the Western Hemisphere, but they're just talking about the broadcast band, not shortwave.
That's
correct?
right. That's right.
Because I had a 500 kilowatt in Bangor, Maine on shortwave.
And up in Canada, they had multiple 500 kilowatts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, at Saxville, New Brunswick.
That's right. We used to drive over there to Sackville because
Yeah,
it's just a short drive from Halifax.
So Doug, can you pick up the 800 megahertz or kilohertz here in Indiana?
Not well.
You could, no, and the reason is in Windsor,
Mhm.
a very popular rock station, CKW. So I've never been able to pick it up. But when I was little, when I was 13, I was able to pick up the shortwave station in Bonaire, the island, Flamingos, Trans World Radio.
Yeah, I used to listen to them, and I used to listen to HCJB in Quito.
Okay, oh, wow. HCJB Quito is the very first wave station I ever picked up when I was 9 years old.
Made all the hair on my arm stand up.
That's when I decided I wanted to be the chief engineer of a shortwave station.
There you go.
There you go.
And 20 years later, well, 23 or 4 years later, I built one in Noblesville.
Yep.
Kilowatt, 200 kilowatts.
Whatever happened to that? I mean, I understand it's off and all that kind of stuff, but what happened to all the physical equipment?
I built two 100 kilowatt Continentals on the Big Island of Hawaii.
Mhm.
No, it was one 100 kilowatt Continental, one 100 kilowatt Harris, two 100 kilowatt Harrises here in Noblesville that was not far from what used to be called Deer Park or Verizon or Ruhoff. And then I took one out of bankruptcy in Bangor, Maine. That was a 500 kilowatt Brown Bovary. But then just as I left LaCie Broadcasting in 2003, I arranged to buy a $21 million shortwave station in South Carolina for $2 million. And once I did that, it doomed Noblesville and Maine. And so that entire operation in Maine and Noblesville was taken down. And it's all in South Carolina now. And my Hawaii station was also taken down and moved to Palau, which you probably know where Palau is.
Sure.
Hey,
I'm
Doug,
just
that-
curious if there's a great location for vacuum variable capacitors that somebody's garage around here.
Hey, Doug,
When they took the one out of Noblesville, there was big capacitors, this big, I mean. And then the tube, the CKQ50 for the 500 kilowatt transmitter in Maine, it was $143,000 new.
wow.
It
Sorry,
was
boss, I dropped it. I tripped.
rebuilt for about $35,000
Holy cow.
garage in Massachusetts. But it was 500 kilowatts at shortwave, but at LF, low frequency, it was 2 million watts.
Wow.
That's out of the transmitter, not ERP.
Hey, Doug, I don't know if you remember, but you you took me a tour of the Noblesville shortwave station. Do you remember that?
I do remember.
I don't remember what year that was. Back in the 80s sometime, 1980s sometime.
On the air on Christmas Day, UTC, 1985, 7 p.m. here in Indiana, but the beginning of Christmas Day, UTC. And for the next 30 hours, I stayed there the whole 30 hours and I played, 29 hours, and I played Christmas music. Then I took off with our religious programming. But that, I don't know when you were there, but it would have been after 86 or later, probably.
Yeah, it would have been the late 80s. Yeah. Before I went to Belden, I remember going there. Yeah. Had some type of a sloping antenna, kind of as a mounted on an angle.
It's what's called a log periodic antenna. It kind of sloped like this.
Yeah.
It covered like 5.9 to 26 megahertz, and I don't remember how much gain it had, but you could just put your transmitter power into there, and then the antenna would find the part of the slope that was resonant at that frequency, and then it would take off from there. It had kind of a high takeoff angle, like 15 or 18 or 20 degrees. In shortwave, you want as low a takeoff angle as possible.
Yeah.
Didn't one of you guys, either Spencer or yourself, find out the hard way not to put a Sony 2010 on the antenna?
Okay, I'm not remembering the Sony 2010. Was that a solid state device?
Little solid state receiver.
Oh yeah, you couldn't do that.
No,
pick up. Okay, so when we were in Noblesville, Roger Bishop is talking about Keith Spencer. He was an engineer, owned radio stations in Rockville. Then he worked for 13, and then he worked for Channel 59. He put Channel 59 on the air in the back in whatever, 1983 maybe.
84. Don't forget Channel 8. Too.
Uh-huh. And so, and then he worked for me while he was working for Channel 59. He also, rather than drive all the way back to Rockville, he would come up to my shortwave station in Noblesville. He'd spend the night there, and he worked like 54 hours a week, while he also worked 40 hours at 59. And all you had to do was wake up to do frequency changes. So he would sleep there. And then I took him to Hawaii in 1987, and he went to Hawaii in 1987, chief engineer of the TV station in Honolulu. And then also we built a shortwave station on the Big Island, and he stayed there until he died, which I think was September of 2015, maybe. What we did, we couldn't put a hammer. We had two antennas, and back when we only had one transmitter, the other antenna was always available, but you couldn't put a solid state on there because it'd blow it up. So he had a Drake
R4C.
Help me out here, somebody. Drake
R4C.
Okay. Anyway, it was tube.
Right.
And it wouldn't blow that up. And so if we were broadcast to the Caribbean, he could work Europe. He'd be the strongest signal coming from the US. And then when we were broadcasting to Europe, he'd switch to South America, and we'd be the strongest signal there.
When's your book coming out, Doug?
No, I'm not doing a book. All right. Everybody wants to go. Can I tell one more story about the Hawaii station?
Sure.
It has a little religious connotation to it because it was a religious station. In Noblesville, we had coax, so it was converted to coax and went out to the log periodic antennas. But in Hawaii, we used 300 ohm line. Inside the building, it looked like waveguide, but it still had the two 300 ohm, just like twin lead inside it. And then it would go to the wall, and then EJ, excuse me, but on the outside of the wall, it looked like a brassiere with two nipples, and that connected to the 300 ohm wires, and there were three of them on each side that would go out to the antennas. But sometimes that would want to arc. The transmitter would want to arc. So coming off the nipples, they would had like a Jacob's ladder that came up, so that if it happened to arc, it would ionize and the arc would rise and then extinguish itself and stop the arc on the transmitter. But we didn't want to admit this, but all of us had this happen to us. We'd be out mowing the yard or whatever, and this would arc. And when it arced, an arc is a tremendous audio speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've all heard of Moses burning bush and God speaking to Moses through a burning bush. When this arced, and while it worked its way up, because sometimes the wind was blowing and it worked its way up very slowly, the whole time you would hear some pastor going, yes, and then ask the God, and we all heard it. We didn't admit it to each other until finally we did. But it was perfect audio fidelity coming out of the arc. But you know, on Christian TV or radio, you got to put a W in there. It's God.
You did it very well, actually.
I'm gonna tell Cheryl you talked about nipples.
Hey, Doug, did you ever do any on-air work, or were you just totally engineering behind the scenes?
I said, I didn't hear you well.
Did you ever do any on-air work, like announcing or anything like that, or were you just engineering behind the scenes the whole time?
Once in a while, I got stuck with Dr. Summerall or with Steve Summerall, and they would interview me. And Steve would help me because he knew the first couple of minutes, not so good, but I was at the Big Island, and some of you know Dr. Lester Summerall. He passed away in 96.
Yep.
There's only one take with Dr. Summerall. You don't do it again. It's live. And even if it's live, or even if it's live to tape, it's live. You don't do it again. So I'm out in Hawaii. He comes down to the Big Island where I'm building the shortwave station. And I'm explaining how the antenna works. And he understands a lot. And about a minute and a half into the conversation, he says, "Now, Doug, why do you think God put the ionosphere up there?" Well, what am I supposed to say?
And what did you say?
Stumbled for a little bit about sunburn and not getting burned up, and then I come up with stuff so we could have a shortwave station and bounce the signal around the world.
There you
And
go.
you don't, you have to answer him.
Mhm.
And you can't do a take two. And that interview actually is on YouTube. If you just type in Doug Garlinger, KWHR, it'll come up on YouTube. Or you can type in Doug Garlinger, Goma, Zaire, and you'll see me driving through Rwanda about 40 days after the genocides. But we probably should change the subject.
Doug is kind of like Forrest Gump. If you look at the archive video, every now and then you'll see Doug in the background.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Life is like a box of chocolates.
You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah. I actually got on the air a couple times. One was when I was in Dallas, Texas, worked at this radio station. They need somebody to fill in for like an afternoon shift on a weekend. And they never asked me to do it again. So I guess must not have done a very good job. And then I was going through some VHS tapes, transferring the digital years ago, and I ran across a tape where I had been interviewed for a public affairs program. I have to assume it actually made it to the air. I don't remember, but it was actually recorded off the videotape. So those were my two instances where I think I actually got on the air.
Yeah.
Bill Cherry suggested, he typed it. He said, if you haven't found it yet, the app Radio Garden is great for listening to the world. And I would agree with that. It's a pretty cool app if you haven't tried it. On your Apple or Android, type in Radio Garden, and you can listen to radio stations all over the world for free. Well, folks, that's all I had planned for this evening. As I said, the next meeting in a month's time is going to feature Fred Baumgartner. So tell your friends, get everybody to come. We're very happy if you would bring a guest. We're very happy if you'd bring a friend, and they don't have to be members of SBE yet. Just bring them along, and we'll get them eventually when they catch or drink the Kool-Aid, as they say.
Say about Fred, he used to help me out in Denver. I had a LaCie television station in Denver, southeast of Denver, not in the mountains, but high above Denver, about 1,300 feet. And Fred lives in Elizabeth,
Right.
close to Elizabeth, and he was about 8 miles from that station. And he would often come and help my chief engineer out there, Ron Vincent, just because he liked to play with transmitters.
Sure. All right. Anybody else got anything for the good of the order before we shut things down for the night?
Thank you for the presentation. It was very well done and enjoyable.
Yeah, most welcome.
Yep.
I'm glad to be able to have it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You all have a fine evening.
Thank you.
Tell a friend
Yep.
and let's come back and do this again next month.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye all.
Bye-bye.
Weber, can you hang on a second?